Lawyers, we are starting one more live stream. Today is Wednesday, April the 8th, 12:32 Rio de Janeiro time. And let's take a look at the news. Let's see what the main headlines are for Brazil. And today, that's a kind of global news. I guess, most newspapers, if not all newspapers, are addressing is the ceasefire between the United States and Iran. And here, it's not an editorial, it's more like a kind of analyst. Like he's saying, there are several, parties that are losing, with this long drafted war, particularly, because of, they're basically, spending all the ammunition. The global economy is suffering, and so on. That's the main headline. And the second main headline is going to be Banco Master again. And now they're addressing how much this bank has paid, specifically to the wife of one of the Brazilian Supreme Court justices. And, just like in 22 months, like the bank paid 80 million reais to this justice wife, right? Like, I mean, the Supreme Court justices, of course, they cannot run a law firm, but in this case here, Alexandre de Moraes, who's a major and a famous justice in Brazil, his wife has like a law firm along with their children, and they were providing services to Banco Master. Banco Master is the bank that went under. At the beginning, the big news was the fact that a Brazilian bank went under, which is extremely rare in the Brazilian bank framework, due to the protections, like the overview by the Brazilian central bank. So it is actually extremely rare that banks go under in Brazil. So that was the big news at the beginning, and then afterwards, like the entanglement between this bank and not only the Brazilian Supreme Court, but also, different levels or different parts of the Brazilian government, they being exposed over time. And, and such entanglement, I mean, it doesn't cease to attract public opinion because naturally, right? Like, I mean, it sounds like very concerning, to say the least, in terms of how much politicians, again, the Supreme Court, and other people who should be focused on developing a public agenda, they were actually, getting something out of this relationship with a bank that was apparently running many fraud schemes, and that's why it went under, right? Like eventually the schemes, they were discovered, and the bank went under, and now this is the fallout. And it's been like this for many live streams. Like if you are here with me, Banco Master is a recurring topic in the Brazilian newspapers. Also reminding you about Remax. Remax in Brazil is our partner for real estate listings. So if you need a realtor, if you need a short list of properties, they are a trusted partner here at the firm. They are based in Leblon, Rio de Janeiro, but they work throughout the states in Brazil. And you can take a screenshot if you want to get in touch with them and just start a conversation. All right. Let's take a look at our chat window. We have Matt. How are you doing, Matt and Adrian? I hope you guys are well, and it's always a pleasure to have you here with us. Let's see their message. Oi, Dr. Oliveira. Once a visa is approved and your client gets to Brazil, can you please explain the process of registering with the federal police? What does this entail, and do you need to be fluent? All right, Matt. Yeah, so, just some background information if other people are you know, wondering about the registration. So there are typically two different routes for foreign citizen to stay in Brazil for the longer term, right? So a longer term is what, like, let's say if you want to spend a year, if you want to spend a couple of years, or if you want to, spend an even longer time in Brazil, what you're gonna secure, what is gonna allow you to stay that long, is gonna be a residency, right? The residency is a legal term, so we're not talking about the residence that you're gonna be living in. We're talking about the legal residency. In Portuguese, we say autorização de residência, which in English would roughly translate to a permit residency, right? A permit residency. And most of our clients, they would apply while physically in Brazil, meaning that they arrive in Brazil. It could be under a waiver, right? Let's say if you are from the United Kingdom, you enter Brazil under a waiver. You don't need a visa. Nowadays, U.S. citizens do need a visa, and there is an e-visa which is super easy to obtain. You get the e-visa, you travel into Brazil, you arrive in Brazil, and now you just discovered Brazil and you are amazed. And guess what? You don't want to go back home. You want to stay in Brazil. So in this case, you're going to apply for your residency while you're physically in Brazil. So in this case, you're not getting any visa. And many people would say, well, I want to get the Brazil Digital Nomad visa. And it is understandable, right? The visa is a kind of, common name, like for anything that allows you to stay longer in a place. In Brazil, we don't call it a visa because this is not going to be stamped on your passport. You're actually going to get what? A resident card, okay? So in this case, we would say a Brazil Digital Nomad residency, and there is no visa involved. And for the Digital Nomad specifically, you would apply using a system. It's an online system that runs on a national basis. So it's not like just São Paulo or Rio or Ceará. It's like the same system across the board. And when you're dealing with the system, you're going to be dealing with an immigration analyst, typically based in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. After your residency is approved through the system, then you're going to get an approval. The approval is going to be published in the Brazilian Gazette. Nowadays is online, and we call it in Portuguese Diário Oficial da União. Once your approval is published there, that's not enough. Next step is going to be registering with the Brazilian Federal Police, right? So we finally got Matt and Adrian to the point that you're asking like the registration. So for the registration, it's gonna, the registration is gonna be specific to the track that you are pursuing, and they are gonna change, or they are gonna have different requirements depending on what you are applying for. Okay, so for instance, for the Digital Nomad residency registration, when you go to the Brazilian Federal Police, typically the only thing that they want to see is going to be your apostilled birth certificate with a sworn translation, and naturally your passport as well. These are the two main documents that they want to see on the spot, because everything else was already reviewed during the application stage, which happens online. Okay, now if you're doing a registration for a permanent residency based on the marriage with a Brazilian, then they're going to want to see many other documents, because typically this registration is not going to have the prior step running through the national online system, right? So the registration for the marriage is going to be more complex, and they are going to typically review all the applications during that appointment. And then, in addition to the birth certificate, apostilled, which we still recommend, even if you are married to a Brazilian, you're gonna need to show other stuff. In the case of the marriage track, you're gonna need a Brazilian marriage certificate, even if you married abroad. You're gonna need to show an FBI background check with an apostille that is not older than 90 days, in addition to many documents. So I'm not going to go over every single track. That would, probably take us like, a long time. But the emphasis here is that, there is no single set of documents or procedure for the registration. The registration is going to depend on the process that you are applying for. Okay, for the registration, you typically need to have an appointment scheduled ahead of time. So there is no such a thing as just dropping by, right? Like I had a consultation yesterday with a gentleman, and he said, well, we were just planning to go tomorrow to Polícia Federal. And, he was even like, he was going to the wrong address. And I said, listen, you can't just show up, right? Like, I mean, sometimes if you show up, if you happen to bump into someone really nice, they may have an exception for you. But I would guess 9 times out of 10, if you try to get like an appointment on the spot, at least in São Paulo, 9 times out of 10, they are going to decline, helping you at any level, right? Maybe they're going to say, listen, here is a printout. You need to go to this address and schedule an appointment. And then you probably will try to, get more information. They're going to say, yeah, I cannot talk anymore because you don't have an appointment, right? And so very important to have an appointment ahead of time. Now, different cities, different states are going to have different timelines for you to secure the appointment. In São Paulo, typically, if you are at the beginning of the month, like we are, still like the first third of the month, there is a good chance you could secure something in São Paulo for May. If you are in Rio de Janeiro, a little bit easier to secure something, like for May, if you are trying to schedule an appointment today. Now you are out of luck if you are in Santa Catarina, right? Like Santa Catarina is nowadays one of the states in which you're gonna wait the longest to get an appointment. Sometimes, our team is taking appointments like for 3 months down the line, right? In addition to that, in Santa Catarina, they don't get you an appointment. You cannot book an appointment online like you can in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. In Santa Catarina, they make you send the documents like to a specific section. They review the documents, and if they're somewhat satisfied, they are going to get you the appointment. Okay, so different states, different cities with different procedures. All right. So that's more or less the main facts of the registration, Matt. In terms of the language, in theory, right? In theory, you don't need to be fluent in Portuguese. Some police officers, they are gonna allow you to take a companion with you. So let's say if you are married, there is a good chance they would allow a spouse. Let's say if your spouse is fluent in Portuguese, there is a good chance they would allow you to take your spouse along with you. I would say that, São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, I would say most of the time they would allow you to do that. If you're taking a friend, then both São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro are probably going to decline your friend to participate. In Rio de Janeiro, there is a higher chance that they would make an exception. In São Paulo, they're pretty picky in terms of allowing third parties to participate. If there is an attorney, right, like with a proper attorney identification, most branches, like most stations, they are going to allow you to bring an attorney along with you. Okay, and some analysts, like some officers, they are going to, speak some level of English, others not so much. And typically, people can get by even without being fluent in Portuguese. General Principal, good to see you over here. Boa tarde, senhor Oliveira e amigos. I hope everyone is well. Glad to have you over here, General Principal. How important do Brazilians value the condomínio club for condo buildings? I see some buildings that have bare bones, but some are very nice. So, General Principal, I assume you're talking about, some level of conveniences for leisure. Like it could be a gym, it could be, I don't know, an area for barbecue, for cooking, right? And nowadays, for new developments, it is somewhat of a trend. So if you're buying like a condo in São Paulo, like a new development, right? Like 9 times out of 10, there's gonna be this kind of condomínio clube. I think that's what you mean by condomínio clube, and this is gonna include like a gym. This is gonna include like a common kitchen area. Typically for condo buildings, like the rooftop, instead of selling the rooftop like to the penthouses, they would actually dedicate the rooftop to those type of things, right? So there is one that I stay in São Paulo very often, is in the Liberty neighborhood, which is a traditional Japanese, not so traditional nowadays. Like there are potentially, I guess, more Chinese people than Japanese, but traditionally, São Paulo sees the Liberty neighborhood as a Japanese neighborhood, right? And over there, I typically stay in a building, and the rooftop, it's a large rooftop, and the rooftop, like there are a couple of pools, there are barbecue areas, there are there is a dedicated space for, like, if you have a birthday party. There is another area just for you to hang out and contemplate São Paulo from the rooftop. So it's a really, really a great area. And in this building, they also have a really nice gym. The gym is actually on the ground floor. And then on the second floor, they have an additional area just like for work, right? So there would be like a kind of co-work area and different setups. So there is one formal in which you have like, long desks with all the, utilities you would need for work. They're going to have some separate desks. Let's say if you're going to work with a colleague, then you can get like a separate desk. And they have, some sofas, some couches, if you want to, work out of a laptop, sitting back and relaxing. It's a really nice setup, right? And interesting enough, like this building is not fancy by any means. I would say is actually on the, it's not cheap and it's not super popular, but I would say it's closer to popular than fancy, and they still have all of those conveniences. So nowadays for new developments, that's something that is almost a necessity, right? Because they're going to be selling apartments on the smaller side. I guess people want to have, options in terms of what they are going to be doing. Because if the apartment is small, you're going to want to have a break outside of the unit, and then you want to enjoy things close by. You don't want to have it to drive. Driving in São Paulo, like more like in the downtown area is not really. I don't know. It's not fun, right? Like, I mean, typically you want to do things that are close by, or you want to take an Uber. But again, for newer developments, very common for you to have all those conveniences within the building. Now, just to make a distinction, it's always surprising to me, like in Leblon, Rio de Janeiro, how difficult it is for you to find any of those things, okay? Because Leblon, as you guys probably know, is like one of the, I guess one of the most famous neighborhoods in the country. for a luxury upscale real estate, and this neighborhood has been built out like forever, right? So there are basically no new developments, or there are very few developments in Leblon, Rio de Janeiro, the South Zone. And whenever there are some, they are not going to be by the beach. They are going to be, inner neighborhood, right? Like they're not going to be by the beach because, again, the beach is completely built out. And maybe because it was the mindset back, 3, 4, 5, 7 decades ago. Basically, you don't find gyms, you don't find community pools, you don't find pretty much any conveniences at all. Okay, and there is one apartment I typically stay in Rio de Janeiro. It's a really nice apartment, by the way, but they don't have they have zero conveniences, right? And even the garage, like the parking spots, they are like I don't know how to say, like they are minuscule, right? Like they're super tiny, and if you have an average size car, you basically cannot park. So first thing, you need to have a tiny car to be able to live in that building. And even a tiny car, like for you to park and leave the car, like, you need to squeeze yourself unnaturally to live in the car, right? So that's Leblon, okay? And now, if you're buying a new development, let's say there are a couple of new developments in Ipanema by the beach. There is one that we get consultations very often, is by Arpoador. And this one has all these conveniences that we are talking about. Okay, so it really depends on the neighborhood. It depends on how new or how old the building is. But I particularly like those conveniences. Okay, difficult to find in Leblon, but in São Paulo, there is no Leblon, there is no coast, right? So much easier to find those conveniences around. Okay, let's see what else we have. All right, let's take a look at something from our backlog. All right, when you're traveling to Brazil, what are your recommendations for airlines? What are the cheaper ones or the best ones, right? Okay, so to travel to Brazil is going to depend on your current location, and that's going to impact the price dramatically, right? Like, so let's say if you are in Europe and if you're coming, from Portugal, typically you're going to have really nice, prices, just because first there is a lot of flights between Brazil and Portugal. Second, because costs are typically lower in Brazil and Portugal, so many times you can get a round ticket for potentially 500 or 600 US dollars, right? Like between Lisbon and São Paulo. If you're flying from the United States, then it's gonna depend drastically on the state and city in which you are located, because the more flights or the more travelers in that particular location, the more flights you're going to have and the cheaper they are going to be. So just to give an example, if you're coming to Brazil from Miami, right, Miami or Orlando, guess what? Prices are going to be rock bottom. Okay, so many times you can have direct flights for $600 if you're coming from Miami or Orlando. You buy in advance, and it's not peak time, right? So if you're traveling in December, January, July, then they're going to be naturally more expensive. But if they are off season, then they're going to be pretty cheap. One interesting location is going to be New York, because New York, if you think about it, is going to add a good number of hours to the flight because it's up north, and it's still cheap to fly from New York or Newark, right, in New Jersey to Brazil, just because of the sheer number of travelers between Brazil and those locations, right? So it's always interesting to me how cheap they can be despite being so much, you know, longer in terms of a flight, right? Now, if you take, flights from, I don't know, like let's say if you are not in one of those cities, let's say if you are in different states, you could be, I don't know, in Tennessee, you could be in Oklahoma, you could be, in different states, then, costs they are going to add up quickly. Because guess what? There are no direct flights, and then you're going to need to fly into another city, and naturally they are going to add this to your fee. Now there are exceptions, like in Dallas, Dallas, as many of you probably know, is the I don't know, home state, home city for American Airlines, right? American Airlines is based in Dallas, Texas, and the flights are still expensive. I don't know why. Okay, so if you're buying like a round trip ticket with American Airlines, they're typically gonna start, at 1,100 U.S. dollars, right? And many other people they are flying from Miami for 600, so it's almost double. I don't get it. American Airlines maybe is more expensive, but you don't get cheap flights out of Dallas to Brazil, right? And in terms of airlines, the most famous ones are going to be American Airlines. You have Delta, right? Delta has many flights between the United States and Brazil. They are probably like the higher end airlines that you're going to be able to pick. And then the more competitive ones or the cheaper ones, like let's say the economy, the budget ones are going to be, it could be Gol, right? The Brazilian ones are Gol and Latam. And then there are two other ones. There is Copa Airlines, and there is another one. There is Copa Airlines. I forgot the name. There are two Latin American airlines. They are very cost competitive, and they typically have flights in few locations. Not surprisingly, like in Florida, right? And then you can buy, if you are willing, to have multiple stops. Sometimes they have airfares from the U.S. to Brazil and back, like for a round trip in the 500 U.S. dollars range. All right, so I hope that was helpful. Aaron, for the business investor visa, tax specifically, how many Brazilians do they expect to see employed? If 1 to 2 employees are employed for, say, 6 years before the business fails, do I keep a residency? Aaron, interesting question. All right. So if you read the regulation, Aaron, there are no guidelines in terms of how many positions. Here at the firm, we work with 2 positions, right? I mean, there is so much crap out there in terms of applications, in terms of how people handle their immigration journeys, that the standards, unfortunately, they are low, and just by creating a couple of positions, we feel like you are typically safe on this front. There are other things to be considered, like, you're going to need to present a business plan. So if you have a business plan that would require 10 employment positions and you're just getting 2, guess what? What you're doing is not compatible to your business plan, and then you're going to have a problem. So, difficult to establish like a minimum, but I would say, like any business that doesn't have at least a couple of employment positions, it's going to be on the radar for the Brazilian immigration, also the Brazilian Ministry of Labor, to target your business and to target your immigration journey, right? So yes, keep at least a couple of positions. In terms of the timeline, right? Let's say, for how long are you going to need to endure are you gonna need to endure this business in Brazil? And let's assume in 6 months you secure the investor visa, or better saying the residency. That's when you become a resident in Brazil. And there is not really well known in Brazil, or sometimes even the immigration, they don't know about it, but there is a residency based on the fact that you've been a resident for 4 years. Okay, so we never had this case, just like I'm telling you right now. So it's more like in the hypothetical, to help you elaborate the concepts of your question, right? Like, so we're not talking about real fact patterns. It's more like in the abstract, but it works more or less like this. Like, you get the residency through investment, you become a resident, and then let's say that 6 years down the line, just like your example, your business goes under, or you stop the business, you sell the business, you do something, and then once you do that, you no longer qualify for the Brazil investor residency, meaning that if something happens to your card and you try to renew and they ask you for an update on your business, guess what? You're not going to be able to present those requirements, and you're not going to be able to renew your residency any longer. However, and again, this is like in the abstract. We never had a case exactly like this, but in the abstract, because you've been living in Brazil for 4 years as a resident, there is a fallback option, and this residency is basically saying, listen, if you've been living in Brazil for 4 years as a resident, guess what? You can apply for a standalone residency. Okay, so even if you lost your original residency, you could potentially apply for this new residency based on the fact that you've been living in Brazil for 4 years for this specific residency. Now, this does not apply to every single track, right? So don't think that this is going to be available to every single thing. For instance, digital nomad, traditionally, it doesn't get you anywhere. So even if you've been living in Brazil as a digital nomad for 10 years, it doesn't mean you would have access to this particular track. I believe that for the Brazil investor, right, it could be real estate investor, or it could be a business investor route, you would have this fallback option, okay? I believe, right? Not guaranteed, okay? So yes, that's the idea. Now remember, with just 4 years, Aaron, like, you could potentially, if you've been living in the country, if you speak a reasonable level of Portuguese, you could actually apply even for citizenship, right? So 4 years, apply for the citizenship, get the citizenship, and then you don't need to worry about residency anymore. All right, yes, Aaron, that was your follow-up question, right? And if I got citizenship before the 6 years, would I keep that? Yes, Aaron, of course. Like, I mean, citizenship, once you acquire the citizenship, then you forget about all the immigration issues, hurdles, and challenges. Right now, you are a citizen. If you want to even leave Brazil, right? Like, I mean, some people, they get the residency and say, you know what, now I want to go back to the US for a bit. The main recommendation I would have is for you to file the saída definitiva. Saída definitiva is like a tax exit process that you file with the Brazilian government. You say, listen, I'm going to be living abroad outside of Brazil. I want to turn off the tax switch. And that's something you can do in Brazil. You turn off the tax switch. Of course, in terms of your income outside of Brazil, you never turn off your taxation within Brazil naturally, right? That would be, there is no such thing anywhere, I believe. But if you are going to go back to the US, and if you have income in the US, you can turn off the Brazilian taxation by filing the tax exit, right? Like, I mean, there is a two-stage process to do that, but that's feasible once you become a Brazilian citizen. Now, if you are a permanent resident in Brazil and you file the tax exit, our understanding is that you are also relinquishing your Brazilian residency, because naturally, like, you shouldn't be able to keep just the upside, right? Let's say, well, I want to keep the permanent residency, but I don't want to pay any taxes. That's not how it works. So if you file the saída definitiva, in theory, the Brazilian government is also getting an input from you to kind of void your permanent residency in Brazil. Now, if you ask me if it happens or not, difficult to track, right? Like, some things they work in theory in a way, and then once this goes, like, to the Brazilian immigration, they handle differently. Like, I mean, and we don't keep track of those outcomes. All right, it was Avianca. Yes, exactly, General Principal. Avianca, right? So, yes, like, sometimes, if I'm traveling between Brazil and the U.S., like with my kids, sometimes I'm gonna resort, to Avianca. Uh, Avianca, they have amazing prices, right? Like, I mean, it just adds like a stop. Typically, if it is like between São Paulo and a major U.S. destination, and their costs, they are affordable, right? Because if you travel during, like, peak time, prices they can get very expensive. Thank you for reminding me. That was exactly the name, General Principal. Avianca. Cristina, hi Cristina. Oi, boa tarde. If I submit a renewal for the digital nomad visa 3 weeks before my current visa expires, do I maintain regular status once my original visa expires? If I haven't heard back yet. Christina, so from a legal perspective, the answer would be yes. Okay, like, I mean, if you apply for, something that is in the system, right? It cannot be in your head that you are applying. Like, it's something that's in the system. You're gonna keep a regular legal status even if your prior visa expires, right? Or residency, better saying, expires, but you are already in the application for the renewal. In theory, this would have you covered in the meantime. Okay, I always say in theory, and whenever I have consultations, I really need to be careful, because some people, they are gonna they're gonna rely on what you're saying, right? Naturally, right? That's why they're coming for advisory. But some people, it looks like they have too much of an expectation regarding how consistent immigration works. And by the way, this is valid for Brazil, this is valid for the US, this is valid for Portugal and elsewhere. It's never 100% consistent, right? So I always needed to highlight to people that that's how it should work from a legal perspective. However, guess what? I've seen more than once people who should be in legal status to be chased by Polícia Federal to pay fines, right? So that's the caveat, right? That's how legally works. If you file something, you're covered. Now, how the immigration is going to handle your case is a different matter. Now, for our clients, I would say 98% or 99% are going to just rely on that, and it's going to be just fine. Some of them, they don't want to rely, they don't want to take any chances, so they're going to be more conservative in terms of the timing of the renewals. Some people, they're going to rely, and guess what? They're going to be chased by the Brazilian immigration. If you're working with us, typically we're going to try to help you. We're going to send a letter to the, to the Brazilian immigration, say, listen, this folk he has an application. Like, you cannot assess a fine. You cannot say that he's overstaying if he has an application in the works. And I think, I don't recall an instance in which we were not able to troubleshoot that from an administrative approach. But in theory, if that's not resolved, then you may need to pay the fine, which would be cheaper than to file an appeal, right? Like, I mean, if you're gonna file legal stuff, in a sense that you're filing like a legal petition with the court, naturally the costs would be substantially higher than to pay a fine that was assessed against you. So in other words, we don't guarantee the outcome, right? We can never guarantee an outcome of an immigration process. But again, going back to the to the short answer is yes. Once you file an application, that is going to typically stop the clock from a legal perspective. All right, Sean, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Sean. Please remind me what the attorney fees are for the nomad visa versus the retirement visa. If I start with the nomad and transition to the retirement, is the price the same? Sean, so, it depends on the specifics. It depends if you're going to apply from Brazil or if you're going to apply from the US or if you're going to apply from elsewhere. I would prefer, instead of sharing the fees, which, by the way, I don't know every fee by heart, I would prefer to share our email address. And this email address is monitored by Justin. Justin would send you we typically send you like an outline about the service with the fees. And then if you share, like a digital nomad visa, retirement visa, she's going to give you like an idea about the fees. And then in terms of transitioning from one to another, they're typically going to be the same. I assume you would use one to, start your journey in Brazil and eventually to migrate to the more robust one, which is naturally the retirement one, right? And, like in theory, it would be like, the same prices as if you were buying individually, right? Like, I mean, and that's somewhat common because the retirement track nowadays in Brazil is much more demanding in terms of documents. So many people, they say, listen, too aggravating, like FBI, background check, a bunch of stuff. So they're going to say, let me start easy and so I can test the waters. And if I really like Brazil during this 1 year, then I'm going to go through for the pain of doing all this paperwork for the retirement track. All right, Sean, that's a somewhat common reality here at the office. Very interesting question. All right, let's see what else we have. We spoke about the cost of traveling between Brazil and abroad. Yeah, I mean, there is another one here is talking about culinary, like why do Brazilians like, such small coffee portions? Like, I mean, the US, like large coffee cups. In Brazil, they're tiny. Yeah, I mean, there are, like it's probably cultural, right? Like, I mean, in the US, there is, and this is interesting. Like, if you compare, like, if you've been to Brazil, you probably know that if you go to a mall and you're going to order a drink, like, we don't have drinks the same size you have in the US. Drinks are typically much smaller, right? And I'm talking about drinks in general, even like soda or, like orange juice or, acai. So the portions, they are typically smaller. And I think it's about, costume. It's also about price. Because naturally, the larger they are, the more expensive they are. So, Brazilian purchase power is lower. So to make things accessible to the public, portions are going to be smaller in general. And so this is one of the parts of my answer, to this question. The second part is going to be because of concentration of coffee. In Brazil, it's pretty common for us to have espresso, right? So If I'm drinking coffee, like whenever I have a chance, I'm gonna prefer espresso over a regular coffee. And espresso is it has denser, a much denser type of coffee, and it's much stronger, right? So for an espresso, like a tiny cup like this, I may have the same amount of caffeine you would have, I don't know, in an average Starbucks cup, right? So I think that's another part of the answer. And then maybe there is a third one. There is a third, reason why coffee cups in Brazil they would be smaller. I think coffee for us is more social than it is in the U.S. In the U.S., many people they're gonna drink coffee, just because it's gonna give you an energy boost. It's gonna help with concentration. Like if you're tired, if you are sleepy, coffee can help you with that challenge. But in Brazil, we typically drink coffee as a social activity. So if I go to someone's house, it's almost impossible that this person is not going to offer me coffee. Of course, it is going to depend on the situation. But what I'm saying here is that you may have during a regular day maybe 4 or 5 cups of coffee, and guess what? If you're drinking a large portion, you're going to have lots of trouble. You're going to have trouble with the amount of caffeine that you're going to be ingesting, and you're going to have trouble because of how many times you're going to need to go to the restroom, right? So because we're drinking like smaller cups, guess what? Then we're not going to need to go to the restroom so often, even though we're having like 5 coffees a day. And we're not going to have an issue with like, a crazy amount of caffeine in our system. So yeah, that would be the explanation about the coffee. Sija, can you please guide if someone from Pakistan can easily apply for digital nomad if he meets the criteria of $1,500? Sija, unfortunately, the answer, to be crystal clear and don't shoot the messenger, right? Like, I'm just answering your question. If I could choose, I would choose that everyone could have, similar access to the Brazilian immigration framework. But typically, Sija, if you are applying out of Pakistan, this is an uphill battle, okay? Chances are they would deny your application even if you were making substantially more than the minimum amount, okay? There is an unsaid and an unwritten policy for the Brazilian government to deny applications from countries in which they think people would actually come to Brazil to live, even though they are applying for a digital nomad. Okay, now this is if you are physically in Pakistan. Now, if you are physically in Brazil, it changes dramatically, because then when you apply through the national application system, they are going to treat you just like everyone else. So the discrimination policy is typically implemented at the consulates and embassies abroad, not when you are physically in Brazil. And the mindset, I think, here, like I say, well, this person is already in Brazil, right? I'm not going to discriminate. Now that you are in Brazil, you're going to have the same access to the digital nomad as a U.S. citizen. Now, if you are, unfortunately, if you are physically in Pakistan, then yes, they are going to make it extremely difficult for you to secure something like the digital nomad, Sija. Unfortunately, all right? Rod, my coffee drink is like yours, social and infrequent. Yeah, Rod. Yeah, I hear you. Yes, social. Coffee as a social activity is so typical in Brazil, and particularly if you are a gringo, if you come to Brazil, if you are meeting with someone, they are gonna jump the gun. Do you wanna have coffee, right? And then you say no, they are gonna insist. Depending on the person or the environment, they may insist multiple times for you to have some coffee, because in our Brazilian mindset is a way for us to connect with someone, right? There is a saying in English like breaking bread, right? And for us, it would be to share some coffee, I guess, right? So whenever you drink coffee with someone else, it's like you are, creating a deeper connection to that person. All right. Sean, thank you so much. I will email and schedule a consultation. Do you know if I apply for either visa in João Pessoa or Maceió, if it will make a difference versus Curitiba or Floripa? Sean, so there are, there are typically two stages. One stage is going to be, the first stage is going to be through the national system. So, for the approval of your application, typically it does not make a difference. After you are approved, then there is the registration stage. And for the registration stage, yes, it's going to make typically a difference in terms of where you are registering. And out of these options, the most difficult one is probably Florianopolis. Right, Florianopolis is just overwhelmed. Like, I mean, there is a huge number of applicants in Florianopolis, so it may take you several months to secure an appointment. But listen, they are all feasible. Other cities that you're mentioning, João Pessoa, Maceió, they are big cities, they are capitals, right? And therefore, you're going to have access to the Brazilian Federal Police. I had a conversation about, target location for the registration with one of you here in the chat. I'm not going to say who, of course. But, at the end of the day, my recommendation is, listen, if you are still picking the city, the destination city, yes, you may take that into consideration. But I would not use like the difficulty of registration as a driver for your choice, right? In other words, go wherever you want to be and take from there. If the registration is difficult, so what? I mean, it's part of life. And I don't want to have our clients living elsewhere or like changing their plans because of the immigration procedure. Okay, I think the bottom line is to pick what's best for you. Now, this said, sometimes we do have clients coming from Florianopolis to Rio de Janeiro because they cannot get an appointment. Particularly for a real estate investor. Visa holders, right? They buy in Florianopolis, they travel to Florianopolis, they are for a couple of months, they want to do the registration, and it's pretty impossible to do that in Florianopolis unless we are planning several months ahead of time. So many times they're going to fly to Rio de Janeiro, so our team can go with them to Santos Dumont for the registration. I don't like that because there is always a chance they are gonna identify that you are not really in Rio de Janeiro, and they are gonna deny your registration. Right? It doesn't mean that they are voiding your approval. It just means they don't wanna process your registration. There is always this chance, and our team, they are always working hard. To make things feasible for you. So many times they're gonna say, yeah, let's try Rio de Janeiro. I always emphasize you gotta let the client know it's not 100% guaranteed, because guess what? They're gonna be buying, airfare. They are gonna be getting an Airbnb. They're gonna be paying a cab. They're gonna be paying meals. And if it doesn't work, guess what? They could blame us for that. And so I always emphasize, highlight, having writing this warning to the client. But many clients coming from Florianopolis to Rio de Janeiro for the registration. That doesn't work for everything, right? For some things, we absolutely do not do that. For instance, marriage. For the marriage track, you should not ever consider that, because for marriage, what happens is like they have random visit checks at the address that you're using for the registration. So if you're coming from Florianopolis and if you're gonna register in Rio de Janeiro, it means they could do a surprise spot visit check on the wrong address, and this could even start a criminal procedure for fraud, right? So big no for the marriage route, but for the investor visa, I do see that happening every now and then, all right? Because in those cases, like the Police Federal is not really concerned. Like, I mean, you bought a property, right? And this is the the base for your immigration status. So they are more relaxed. But for the marriage, and even more so for the União Estável, they are absolutely paranoid about your address. So don't do it. Okay. All right. So what else? Rod, I'm a single retiree from the U.S., seriously thinking about retiring in Florianopolis, hoping it's a welcoming and nearby services, restaurant, cafe, shoreline, walkways, parks. Yes, Rod. Rod, have you checked our video about? We have recorded videos about several neighborhoods, in Florianopolis, and the one that is gonna match what you're saying is going to be Beira Mar, right? Beira Mar is like, is right after you enter the island, right after you cross the bridge between the continent and the island. That's where you're going to find the Beira Mar. Let me see if I can find this video real quick. All right. And then I can share the link here with you guys. Let me see. I am in our channel, and then I'm gonna do Beira Mar. Beira Mar. Yeah, no luck. Like I was using the wrong search box. Let's see this one, Beira Mar. Yeah, I mean I got the video over here.
Since the dawn of time.
I'm gonna share the link with you. And this is the one I would recommend you to check. And of course, if you're going to live in Florianopolis, there are many neighborhoods for you to check. But this one is the one for Beira Mar, right? And you have everything you may want in a 5-minute Uber driver, or even by just walking. Okay, by just walking. And that's why, like, I mean, when I am in Florianopolis, that's where I stay in Beira Mar. Okay, and let me see if I can share a little bit of city nature, the kind you interact in between meetings. So this is Beira Mar. Water, wind, changing light, and psychological. Have
I don't think we've ever experienced anything growing as quick as this.
The whole video here, but I think you got the idea. You may, watch the video, and we have other neighborhoods, right? There are more remote neighborhoods. They are a different style. My recommendation is, like, if you are interested in Florianopolis, check those different neighborhoods and see what matches your requirements the best. So I would like to ask you, if you're here with us, like our content, that helps our business, that helps other people like you find the content. And next live stream is going to be 1 week from today. So we're talking about April the 15th. Remember, on Wednesdays, we start a little bit earlier in the day. We start at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. And I want to thank you for your participation and wishing you all a blessed rest of your day.